Hello. 2021 just keeps happening. Time just continues to move. February was Black History Month. I celebrated by reading only POC books, which was lovely, and that's a thing that I'll be doing for the rest of time. I had one long hauler that you'll see, and then some other really good ones that I'm excited to tell you about. The first book I want to talk about is Luster by Leilani. I actually picked this book up because it was recommended to me as a comp title for the book that I'm currently querying, Don't Tell Anyone. And so I needed to see what that was all about. I spend a lot of time thinking about what is new adult, what is that genre between YA and adult that I wish I saw way more of, and it's this. Sometimes you see YA books that lean older, sometimes you see adult books that lean younger. This is that early to mid 20s, post-grad, I hate my job, having an affair with an older man kind of book. It's also just a beautifully written story about a young Black woman living in New York City, working in publishing, which was a really entertaining aspect of the book, and having an affair with an older white man. She ends up meeting his wife and they sort of get into a relationship of sorts. I don't want to give it away. And it's just fascinating the way it's told. It's balanced really beautifully. This husband and wife that she's kind of having the affair with the man, they have an adopted Black daughter. And so that brings in a really interesting dynamic between the narrator and their daughter, because what does she think of this woman, and is she supposed to become her role model? And I'm so glad I read this book. The next book I want to talk about is Transcendent Kingdom by gyasi. This has been on my radar for a minute since last year, and I'm so glad I finally read it. I had a long drive, and so I devoured the audiobook in basically one sitting. One of the best decisions I've ever made. It is very short, deceptively, and it's one of those sort of generational books that goes between different points in the main character's life. You know, she's in grad school, and then she's back in her childhood, and then in adulthood, but it's extremely purposeful the way those storylines are woven together, and it's not at all the traditional way you see that happening, where it's, you know, a chapter for present day, a chapter for the past. It's all woven together through theme and through these beautiful and heartbreaking plot points that remind her of something or that foreshadow something else in her life. Deals heavily with family, with balancing religion and science, with addiction. And when you learn what the title Transcendent Kingdom means, that was the first of many heartbreaking moments. Gyasi is the author of this book called Homegoing, which was her debut. And so this is the follow-up. I believe Homegoing has some similarities there with the structure, and I think I really need to go back and read her first book. I think this is one of those situations where the author's follow-up kind of just outdid what they previously had done, which I feel like I'm seeing a lot of lately, like with Britt Bennett following up The Mothers with The Vanishing Half, and Garth Greenwell. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is that like new and improved second book. But the first one was insanely successful and award-winning, but this one kind of broke out a little bit more. But I'm so glad that I read this book. The voice, I'm a slut for a good, unique structure, and so I loved it so much. The next book I read in February was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Malinda Lo. This is a historical fiction that takes place in San Francisco during the 1950s McCarthyism Red Scare that follows a young woman discovering her sexuality in high school, going to this place called the Telegraph Club with her sort of new love interest. To read something of a coming out story in the 50s was fascinating. It's not a coming out story, it's really more self-discovery and fear in a way that is different from the 2000s coming out stories that you see. It was so fascinating. I really loved this book. Also deals a lot with family, and so those historical aspects take you back in time every few chapters to her family coming to the United States. The main character, Lily, is Chinese American. This was a sort of outside of my comfort zone contemporary read because I don't do a ton of historical, and I think that needs to change now. It was always compelling, and there were parts of it that were more romantic, there were parts that were high stakes and scary, some of it just dealt with friendship. Sometimes you could forget that it was 1950s, and sometimes you definitely could not. So if you're looking for a queer book that will kind of stretch your scope of, you know, contemporary, it's also got a lot of heart, I just will be recommending this to everyone. Next up, I want to talk about Check Please Volume 2 by Ngozi Ukazu. I read Check Please Volume 1 back in January. There are only 2 volumes, and so I was saving this for a dark day. My queer graphic novels that I've been reading are the Heartstopper series and this one, and because this one ended, I didn't want it to. Book 1 was freshman sophomore year and book 2 is junior senior year, and so junior senior year gets obviously a little more high stakes. This is about a hockey vlogger in college who is gay, and in this one really follows his relationship with a previous member of his team who graduates at the end of book 1. So much goes down. It's really sweet. It's not, you know, rife with like tumultuous conflict. It's mostly really just a joy to read. Graphic novels are something that I'm kind of dipping my toe into very slowly, and so I'm starting with all the gay ones, and this one is just so lovely. Some of the hockey stuff obviously like went over my head, and I cared way less about that than the gayness and the love story, but the characters were all really sweet and compelling. More books that don't have to be like heartbreaking and sad for the gay people. I think we're seeing that a little more now, and it's really nice. Next up, I have to tell you about Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is another book that kind of falls into that new adult age category where the main character is 28 going on 29, just got her PhD in astronomy and is freaking out, doesn't know what to do with her life. And we meet her having just married a stranger blackout drunk in Vegas, and there's kind of a love story between her and that stranger who she's now married to. Oh, and it's also very queer, obviously. So more books about people uncertain in their 20s, please, more of that. I want to see that. Unfortunately, I did struggle with Honey Girl the most this month. While something like Luster felt like an adult book that skewed, you know, down to new adult, this feels, it reads very YA. The voice kind of reminded me of another 17-year-old. But that's something I pretty quickly got past. There's kind of a very long list of side characters who seem great, but we don't really get to know them. I had a really hard time tracking the main character's friends and what they meant to her. And so the main character obviously spends a lot of time in her head, rightfully so. She's dealing with racism at job interviews. She's dealing with the uncertainty of her future. And kind of every scene is just her processing that to another new character. It's like, I'm gonna go talk to my mom on the phone about it, and then I'm gonna talk to my friend about my conversation with my mom, and then I talk to my other friend about the same thing. And then I fly to New York to meet my wife, who I married in Vegas. So it was just very chaotic. It had kind of like second draft vibes. Like there's so much in this that I wish I could just like take and see it implemented into a more cohesive version of this story. With that said, I'll definitely be reading everything else that Morgan Rogers writes. I love the themes of this book. I did like the characters. I wish there was more of a lot of things and way less of what was actually there that was weighing it down. It's one of those things where you get the theme at like page 50, and by page 120, we're still just kind of drilling it down. And that was a frustrating reading experience for me. And the final book I want to talk to you about for February is A Promised Land by Barack Obama. I loved reading this book so much. I'm proud of myself. A presidential memoir? What? I would wake up every morning and read a chapter. Sometimes that didn't work. Sometimes I would just like audiobook it at night. Did you hear my dog? Audio is definitely the way to go with this one. He reads it and it's almost 30 hours long. You speed it up and so it doesn't take that long. But it's extremely entertaining, especially the first 200 to 300 pages which follow the campaign. It's a very personal account of things he regrets and everything that happened, what he's proud of. I would find myself going back on YouTube to look at these moments in the media that he talks about, because he really walks you through his thought process on, you know, his intentions, what was going through his mind, and then how it was portrayed and how that affected everything else in his presidency. It was just so fascinating. It is an extremely subjective account of what we just witnessed in his presidency. I was in 5th grade when he was inaugurated, so I didn't get to vote for him. I came of age under his presidency, and so to read about that, and there will be a second volume, it was fascinating. I remember when it came out, the 2020 election hadn't even happened, which felt kind of bold. It was like, how are we supposed to read this when we don't know what the future is? And fortunately, future's looking bright, and so this was much more digestible to me. A message of hope and hearing about his mistakes, his moments of pride, and it was just lovely. Even if you don't get to read the whole thing, it's definitely worth picking up. So those are the books I read in February. My name is Tiernan. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one, and I'll see you guys very soon. Goodbye.